What's up guys? This is going to be a video reflecting on my playing experiences with Lilith so far. I've now taken her through 20 games, and I thought I'd share my reflections on what it's like to use her, the way I've used her, and some tips and tricks I've picked up. To be honest, 20 games is really just scratching the surface in Malifaux, and qualifies me to say, yeah, I've tried her out. So what I'm about to say is just based on my experience, and that experience is limited, and it might be different to yours, in which case, put it down in the comments. I'd be interested to read and how others have approached her. So let's flop it out on the table. What are my win-loss stats? Yeah, not that impressive really. I pretty much win as much as I lose. Really not sure what this is saying other than when I play better or get luckier than my opponent I win, and when I play worse or get more unlucky I lose. But I guess the take-home message is that I'm a pretty average Lilith player in my meta. Okay, so given my outstanding qualifications to talk about this subject, let's dive into Lilith. So what I'm not going to do is just read off her card and tell you what her stats and abilities are. You can all read, and there are enough content producers that go through that kind of minutiae already. I would recommend highly the Schemes and Stones episode on Lilith for that kind of thing. What I'm going to talk about is where I think she fits within the game, a little bit about crew composition, and how I use her in terms of being a gaming piece. So the way I see it, there are three types of Mast in Malifaux. There are the blasters, who tend to specialise in dealing lots of damage over a wide area, and force enemy crews to pay a heavy cost for what is otherwise a very strong tactic of keeping together. There are then summoners, or force multipliers, who tend to win games through attrition, and building or rebuilding particular support synergies within the crew, allowing the group to perform better than the individual models would otherwise be capable of. And then there are the scalpels, and I think this probably represents the most numerous group. And my opinion is that Lilith is a very strong member among their ranks, and what these guys do is pick out key enemy pieces with precision strikes. The idea being that most crews have one or two models that really hold the force together. It could be something like a big beater that's there to put pressure on the opponent so the rest of the crew can do its thing, or it could be the Silurid, the scheme runner, that's intended to be the point scoring workhorse. Or maybe it's just that model that sits in the backfield and makes everything else better than it should be. And often when you remove that linchpin, it doesn't take much for the rest of the crew to start unravelling. And scalpels are the pieces with the tools to do that. Now certain masters can fall into different categories. I'm thinking like Misaki, who can do scalpel and blasting, I think. But Lilith is a scalpel through and through. But she's got a lot of nuance as to how she can achieve the neutralization of other models. At its most basic, she can chop their dick off with a giant sword. And this is kind of being covered as in her role of a beater. And I've got these vague categories like alpha and beta. And alpha just means that this is something they're awesome at. You can do it pretty much unsupported, and it's what you should be using them for. Beta, beta means good, but they probably shouldn't be doing it unsupported, that kind of thing. I did kind of and ah between whether or not she should be an alpha. I mean, she's melee 7 with a 3-4-6 damage track that can have a positive to damage if she hasn't charged, or if she does charge, she can ramp this up to 4-5-7. A 2-inch melee range, which can be a 3-inch melee range, and basically focusing for free if she takes a particular upgrade, the Living Blade. So yeah, she can totally do the beta role. So whilst you can do awesome stuff like this sudden darkness charge from right, blah, red Joker damage to Ophelia, now you see Francois, now you don't. Chill out, Sonya. Oh yeah, the double backstab was sweet. Unfortunately, running in there with the sword swinging doesn't always work out. Oops. Fuck. Ooh, shit. Yeah, I had that one coming. So yeah, killing things is awesome fun, and Lilith certainly can do it. But a lot of those pictures I showed her wading through the corpses, I don't think I actually won. Whereas every time you saw her stretched out on the back, I lost that game hard. So yeah, the sword is something your enemies have got to respect, and switching gears in the late game, when everyone's resources are mostly spent, can really turn things around, but it's her other abilities that they're going to learn to dread. And this is where we step into her control role. Tangle Shadows is the big power move, so let's talk about that. So here in Gracie and Bert making trouble for my Waldgeist. Way out on some secluded flank. You know, obviously the Waldgeist goes down and the squat marker is theirs. Cue Tangle Shadows. Gracie, an expensive key model, is picked out and placed in the middle of my crew where she now has to contend with that great sword. McTavish, who can shoot into combat and is actually engaged with her and so can do the death roll. and the Doppelganger who can mimic McTavish and ignore armor with Retribution's Eye. Needless to say, Gracie did not walk out of this. At the same time, I've kept up the pressure on the flank with Mr. Graves, and Mr. Bert Jebsen has now got to deal with rather more than he bargained for. So a major weapon in Lilith's Scalpel toolkit is to be able to pick out any model within 12 inches because she can simply ignore line of sight to anything she targets with a cast or charge action. Word to the wise, not every target is appropriate. You would be surprised by how many things walk around Malifaux with backpacks of high explosives. So target priority is super important, doubly so because Tangle Shadows is a very expensive move. It's got a cast of 5, which is fine on a minion but sucks on a master, because you're going to be going after high priority targets that will usually have good stats and or your opponent is willing to put in a lot of effort into protecting. So it means you're going to have to use a high card, probably your highest card. And as the move requires 2 masks and you've only got 1 baked in, you either have to get a high mask card or Soulstone for 1. In most cases it's probably best used to snag enemy scheme runners. They'll tend to have lower stats, will go down quite easy once you're getting to know them in the middle of your crew, won't be that much of a threat if you fail, and they'll be a long way away from where they actually wanted to be in any case, as opposed to if you're taking in a beta or some kind of expensive henchman or something that either want to be in the middle of your crew or are much better equipped to deal with their ill fortune when they find themselves there. There are a few other ways to use Tangle Shadows. It's such a versatile and good move. And that is to supply other Scalpel models, such as Nekima, into the middle of the enemy crew, where they can take down your target like a Master or Beatstick, etc. Another way to use it is to reposition Lilith herself, which works quite well for scheme running, but we'll cover that later. So the Great Sword and Tangle Shadows are 2 of the most obvious ways for Lilith to scalpel the enemy. But then there's a couple of other tools which require a bit more finesse, and which I'm still working on. The first is Wicked Vines, an attack, again with a 12-inch range, that does 1 damage after succeeding and applies a condition, which means the model can't declare walk or charge actions, and if they get pushed then they take 3 damage. In this picture we're seeing Victoria's positioning for a lethal alpha strike on my rather poorly positioned crew. The performers of Siren called the sisters through the hedge, and now what's going to happen is Ashes is going to walk around over here and place her sister Blood in base contact, and then Blood will accomplice and come around and destroy my crew. What I could have done here was to use Wicked Vines to hold the sisters in place, preferably both of them, but one will do, leaving them stuck out in the open and vulnerable to my counter-strike next turn, and given that I've got the Doppelganger, things could be pretty unpleasant for them. And this kind of thing is why condition removal is so important to have. And that's why I've been saying neutralize instead of kill, because really the ultimate aim is to stop a particular effect happening. And if a model can't be where it needs to be to produce that effect at the allotted time, that critical moment, then it almost might as well not be on the table. Killing the piece obviously lowers the probability that it's going to be able to produce the effect, but the trade-off is killing a model takes a lot of resources usually. Whereas Wicked Vines can take a model out of the game for, with higher risk but a much less resource cost. Much more situationally, you can also use Wicked Vines on your own models, such as when your opponent has a nasty thing like Obey. In the last turns of this game, my opponent's got 2 squat markers and I've got 3. It's the last turn, and if I don't score Squatters' Rights this turn, then I will lose the game. All the rider has to do is obey Barbarous to walk off the scheme marker, squat marker even, and then he can remove my claims to them with his remaining models. If I'd routed Barbarous with Lilith, Zoraida would have been unable to command him to walk away with her obey. Alternatively, you can use it for killing. Again, very situational, but models on 1 wound, like this Leviticus's waif, have still got to be a bit careful. There is a better option for range damage with Lilith though, and that is the Wicked Mistress. Upgrade gives you the attack, the Transfixing Gaze. It'll lure models their charge towards Lilith, and if they finish their movement in contact with impassable or severe terrain, they take a hazardous terrain damage flip and get slow. It's a very good ability and I need to use it more, but it is also quite costly, as you're going to have to use a Soulstone or a High Tome every time you try to cast it. But it does often feel that Lilith needs a range option to make her relevant while she's hanging back in the centre of her web, and this is probably her best ranged damage attack. But let's not forget about lure. Lure is freaking awesome. You need it. Get it now in your crew. You see this Tengu all the way over here? Well, it made the mistake of walking to like here. Then it got lured. Then it got lured some more and it died. See this Thunder Archer trying to be a bastard and shoot me with outline of sight? Next turn it got lured. And then it died. Sorry, there it is, about to die. But notice what I'm using here to do the luring is the Beckoner and the Doppelganger, not Lilith. Lilith's lure is probably the best in the game, now that the bells have been errated. It's a casting 8, it makes models move their charge range, which tends to be further than their walk. I should be accurate, sorry, push their charge range, which means it can combo with Wicked Vines to do more damage, and also is relevant for Pounce, which Lilith crews tend to have a lot of. But it is only range 12, and there's quite a bit of difference between 12 and 18 inches. And for me, lure is something that really I want to be spamming, because pulling out a key model in the early turn is, or in the early turns, is just such an effective strategy. And as I said, Lilith's Transfixing Gaze is just too costly to do even once or twice a game, let alone multiple times a turn. There is the thing you can do where if you take the Living Blade and Wicked Mistress upgrades, you can route a model, place the forests down in base contact with Lilith, Transfixing Gaze it to push it out of the vines, taking 3 damage, into your forest, taking potentially 1, 2, 3 damage flipped and slow, and then trigger the Pounce ability on your Greatsword for a free attack. And if there's other Nephilim around, like Tots, or even Rogaru now, even more pouncy goodness, but fuck, setting that up is a lot of effort. And I fall into the camp of, in most cases, you might as well just run up and hit it. One last thing to say on Wicked Vines is that only pushes break it. So if a model gets moved, say with the Beckoner's Lure, they move the allocated distance but are still rooted. Worth considering if enemies need to be within a certain area and have no access to push. Finally, for her control game, we've got Lilith's Illusionary Forests, which can be found on her Beck and Malifaux upgrade. And anybody who's even glimpsed Lilith knows this upgrade is an auto-include. I've never played a game without it, and indeed it's often been the only upgrade I take. Not that that's the best plan, I'm starting to think that she needs another upgrade, most of the time to tailor her to that, a specific mission. But Beck and Malifaux, staple it, glue it, sellotape it, whatever you got to do, blue tack the fucking thing to the card, because those forests are as essential to her playstyle as anything is. How to use them? Well, it turns out it's a bit of an art form, and I have kind of struggled with it, I've got to admit. This photo is from one of my earlier games where I missed a absolutely perfect opportunity. This is like turn 1 or 2, and I've got Lilith far too far upfield for this early in the game, and in fact she ended up being beckoned off over through this gap to go play with Jacob Lynch and all his friendly friends, which didn't work out too well for her. But where I should have been is back in this corner, so this bit here was blocked by some kind of fencing or whatever, so putting the trees down here would have meant that she was absolutely invisible to anybody not prepared to wade into the middle of my crew and stand in the trees, whilst she could strike out at anything within a 12-inch radius. If I didn't want to be quite so aggressive, I could have been up here and stuck the forests here and then only been visible from this kind of angle, which my opponent would be unlikely to get to. And this kind of zone here, in the middle board and then 6 inches or so up from the deployment zone, is Lilith's territory. There's usually some kind of terrain to hide behind, and if there's not, use her forests to deny an enemy's range game, and it's generally quite a commit for most enemy crews to put something threatening up at this far, at least in the early few turns. And I like this photo because it illustrates a point quite nicely, which I think is probably Lilith's motto, and that's when Lilith ends an activation, she should not be seen. And your forests can greatly assist that, although it's ideal if you don't have to. And the forests can be used to assure that, although it's ideal if you don't have to use them to protect Lilith, and instead use just, what the table provides, what Malifaux provides, which enables you to use the forests to protect your other dudes from the unstoppable wave of guild filth that's about to hit them. Here's another example where I'm using the forests to shield Nakima's approach to the gremlin hordes. Now, as I say, I found the forests tricky, but there's kind of 3 ranges you use them at. If you use them at long range, say close to the enemy, let's just take these guys for example, If I put the forests up here, then it's blocking the maximum amount of my enemy's line of sight. But all my enemy would have to do is dip his toe in them or move around them, and then he'd be able to see anything as normal. Unless I also caught them in the wicked vines, in which case they wouldn't be able to move or see anything, which I think is what I'm doing here to keep Francois out of the game. Generally it's useful for big ranged threats like Lazarus, because their core competency is shooting things from range needing line of sight, but it's also perfectly useful against things that want to go charging into your sweet sweet children. Beware of things that have access to push, like I think Francois in there actually did. He got out of it somehow at least, but it held my opponent up for a turn and put some damage on the little bastard. And then there's mid-range like this, which can block off a reasonable amount of your crew. Forces the enemy to come towards you a bit more to be able to see through them. But unless you're using it in combination with other terrain already on the board, it does tend to just get manoeuvred around. And finally you can deploy them at close range, close to Lilith, which means the enemy has to come a long way generally. Not like this where I'm standing right in the fucking middle of the table. And it's generally harder for them to coordinate an assault on Lilith or whatever model you're using the forests to protect. Slightly better example shown here. Or maybe this is a better one. We've got some 10 Thunder goons approaching through the centre of the table. No one but the archer who's about to die can see me. And what I've been doing here, which was quite fun, was walking the beckoner up so that she could see through the forests, beckoning and then pushing, using her trigger back out of line of sight. The doppelganger could do the same thing, walking up, copying, getting the mimic trigger, beckoning and then walking back again. Or shooting with McTavish or the Illuminated guns, whatever. The fun thing I did in this game was when my opponent started to shift his attack route around to this side, I could switch the forests like gates to block him off, protect myself, and what's that? Control the field! The strategy was Headhunter, by the way, so there's no incentive to go charging off up the board, and if you can bring your enemy to you, say with Lure, you can quite happily sit back and play a defensive game. And the trees were awesome for disrupting my opponent. In this game again, using the forests close up to models that I want to protect. A mature Nephilim ignores armour with Retribution's Eye is not what Lazarus bargained for, and he can't really get very much support from Rusty Alice, who can't charge or shoot the Nephilim. She'll have to walk up if she wants to try to engage him. As too will this Abomination, because there's a dodgy charge lane where he can't quite get to it. Using the forest somewhat aggressively to block opponents' line of sights and abilities to each other is quite fun. So here I'm choking up the centre of the board with Lilith, and I'm aware that Johann might want to come in and try to free things up. I've blocked his line of sight so he can't charge or flurry. I've also blocked line of sight between the Performer and Johann, so she can't just siren call him closer. However my opponent's going to deal with this situation, it's going to cost him at least one more AP than he'd otherwise have to use. And if you think about how many powerful auras there are, if the model's more than 2 inches apart, you can slip those trees in there and block it off. As remember, they can be put pretty much anywhere. Under terrain, under markers, under models. My personal preference is to stick them hard up Sonia's arse, but maybe that's just me. You could also use the forests to block line of sight if something's engaging Lilith with 3 or 4 inch melee, and get out of engagement scot-free. So many uses, these things are so good. Okay, so we talked a lot about control. I'm a bit bored of that now. Let's talk about scheme running. Right, I've put her as an alpha scheme runner, which suggests that that can be her main thing that she's doing in the game, and I'm going to try to convince you that she can. First off, she's got 3 AP. What scheme runner doesn't like having 3 AP? And a 6-inch walk, and she's essentially unimpeded and can take the Wings of Darkness upgrade to get flight and just ignore every piece of terrain ever. This makes her so fucking fast. Let me show you how fast she can be. So here we are, it's like turn 4 or something. I'm stuck in my deployment, well, just off my deployment zone. The guild has smashed through my lines, and I've got still got an entourage duty to perform. Let's go up. Okay, this is probably the better picture. So I'm stuck here in combat with this thing that's just not going to shift, and this is pretty much my board edge. Lilith activates, she casts Tangle Shadows on McTavish and doesn't swap any other models, so she herself gets placed in base contact with him. So that's potentially 12 inches travelled in a single AP, and then I double walk another 12 inches, suddenly threatening Sonia, who thought she was safe, and I'm just a hair's breadth away from my enemy's deployment zone. I hope this is showing you how Lilith can switch gears and change the momentum of the game. Because be honest, would you have seen that coming? Okay, so in this game I'm going for breakthrough or something. I'm playing things a bit cagey, trying to avoid getting voodoo dolled to death, or eaten by Nakima. I'm skirting my crew around this way to try to hold these markers. Barbarous has got up over here. A bit later I slip through into the backfield with Barbarous. Now he could go off into the backfield on his own and start dropping markers, he's got nimble, but I kind of need him to help out my poor mature in the centre here. Lilith's been hanging back over here, innocently just cleaning up the straggler Roostler Rider, holding on to my assets, staying a long way from the Kima or any voodoo dolls. And then she strikes, Tangle Shadows again, 12 inches or more up the board, using Barbarous as the target. Walk, drop a marker, shield myself with the trees, and then next turn again do the same thing, walking, dropping markers, shielding the trees, rooting Nakima. Scoring points, still part of the game and very hard to remove. Go on then, one more. Lilith's lurking in this building, looks like she's trying to, settle down here, become the spider in the web, set up the web and start just annoying people over here. Primordial Magic, hanging around the backfield, doing what he normally does. Innocently starting to move up the field along this exposed open flank. A little bit later the shit's going down in the middle here. And oh look, the Primordial's made its run, Lilith has Tangle Shadowed out and is now right in the backfield, pooping out those markers again. And yes, my centre is collapsing, but they did enough to win me the game. And that's all you can ask. So the next note I've got here is game style, and I think I've pretty much shown you how I've been using Lilith. But I guess to pull back and generalise, she is an all-rounder. She can do pretty much any strategy, any scheme pool, and have a good crack at it. Some masters tend to skew in a particular direction, favouring certain things like, more kill-dependent missions or more scheme marker dropping missions, that kind of thing. And certain pools can come up where these masters might have an edge over Lilith, but on the other hand they tend to have pools that are, not quite so much to their liking, whereas Lilith can still perform really well. Some masters have a skew, I don't think Lilith does. If you've got a lot of Neverborn masters and wondering when to take out Lilith, I'd suggest she's at her strongest on a table with lots of blocking terrain. And in these parentheses I've got the idea that if you're going to go for clustering attack style, bunching up models in a particular area and probably going for more killing, then taking lots of Nephilim models can be quite strong in sticking with Lilith's theme. In scheme pools that require your crew to spread out a bit, or against a gunliney opponent, the Swamp Fiends can be durable and difficult to pin down, though you'll probably sacrifice a degree of killing power if you go too heavy on them. So continuing along that train of thought, here's a really quick summary of some of the main crew builds Lilith can thematically do. To describe how they work probably takes a video in itself, and maybe I'll do that another time, but for quick, right here, the AllComers list is, surprisingly enough, pretty solid and good against, in most scheme pools and against most opponents. Reason being, it's got a lot of tools to put pressure on the enemy and counter the enemy's pressures, and generally doesn't have that many weaknesses. For newcomers to Lilith, looking for a place to, ground yourself, something like this is a good place to start, and for people who think they're going to be facing Lilith, again, you could do worse than anticipate something like this coming your way. Briefly how this works is the Terratalk, the Mysterious Effigy, Doppelganger and Lilith and the Primordial Magic can all run schemes to a greater or lesser extent. The Primordial Magic and Mysterious Effigy give card support, and the Doppelganger also gives the Ill Omens initiative cheating ability, which is fantastic for getting a double round in with your beaters potentially. In terms of muscle, this crew's got Lilith, obviously with her great sword, trying to avoid that if you can. Nakima is the big one. She can hit about as hard as anything in the game. Mr. Graves, Doppelganger and Johan all have min damage 3, and Doppelganger can attack like a second Nakima potentially. Doppelganger's got 1,000 faces because that's the new best way to kit her out. If the opponent's got armour, take Retribution's Eye, or if they don't and there's scheme markers around, Malifaux provides, something like that. You can alternatively give Rect's Eye to Johan, which is pretty scary for constructs. To support the muscle, both Lilith, Mr. Graves and Doppelganger again can push or place models around. And actually I think Nakima and Johan also have pushes on their attacks. Pushing in places, placing win games, and it's also good because Johan's got Flurry and can make the most of that. so multiple models potentially with 3 attacks per activation. Icing on the cake is Johann's condition removal, which in some games can just, that can be so important. So yeah, multiple strong options for scheme running, damage delivery, and movement shenanigans. Lots of redundancy, tough models, and 8 activations, which is a pretty good place to be. Lilith will always have Beck and Malifaux. I'm not talking to you if you skip that. And a second upgrade slot, for which probably should be used to suit the mission. If you need Lilith to survive, then Aether Connection's a good shout. If you need her to be moving around or more scheme runnery, or if there's lots of terrain, On Wings of Darkness is fantastic, and I think most people run with that. If you need her to be a bit more dangerous at range, you stick Wicked Mistress on. I generally find Lilith runs really well with just 5 Soul Stones, due to the double rush of magic from the Primordial and Lilith's abilities. I don't tend to need to Soul Stone very much, although with Wings of Darkness as well you can do an impressive amount of card cycling. I just tend to find that I get a good enough hand anyway. However, when Nekima is in your crew, you want to push those Soul Stones up as much as you can, because holy crap, she needs them. As I said, this is a very competitive slot in Neverborn. If you need some more lures, you can get Lilitu or a Beckoner. Or if you want to play things another way, you can swap out Johann for Mr. Tannen. This is a favourite trick of a player known on this channel as Gitly, a very good Lilith player here in the UK. His Leave It to Luck ability basically bumps Lilith's casting for Tangle Shadows up to casting 7, which means pretty much anything in the game becomes a potential target to, if it comes within 12 inches, be swapped out for something, say the Mysterious Effigy or even the Primordial Magic, to be beaten on by all the rest of these guys. And if they try to cheat, they have to discard a card first, which will ruin a hand in no time. It's an extremely nasty idea, extremely hard to counter, considering how good Lilith's hand tends to be, and Gitly is a very bad man. In terms of Lilith herself, take her with Beck and Malifaux, because if you don't, I'm not talking to you, as you clearly haven't been paying attention. And then another upgrade to suit the strategy or scheme. A lot of people favour Wings of Darkness. It is a fantastic upgrade. That flight ability is just stupendous, because remember, she's trying to hide behind cover most of the time, which means if it's blocking, it can also be a double-edged sword and block her from being able to move where she wants to. Flying solves that. And drawing extra cards when you Soulstone is also fantastic. Although, to be honest, for myself, I find that between double rush of magic from Lilith and the Primordial Magic, I tend to find my hands are good enough that often I don't really feel I need to Soulstone. But it's always an option. Another option for an upgrade is Aether Connection if you want Lilith to be more survivable. Say if some form of Kill the Master is in the scheme pool and you're thinking she'll need to be a little bit closer to the action than she's normally comfortable with. But in this particular example I've used Wicked Mistress because it's a good range attack for her. As I hope I demonstrated. She can run very well at 5 Soulstone cash, and I'd only ever really run her above that if I'm taking Nekima, because Nekima is a massive Soulstone sponge. Other thematic and probably less competitive builds are the Grow build, which focuses on growing your little Nephilim into big Nephilim, and I find it does attrition surprisingly well. I mean, at least for Lilith, who tends to have virtually no healing and extraordinarily limited summoning capabilities in most of her crews. I mean, this is pretty much it. I put down that it counters elites. Basically, the more enforcers, henchmen that your enemies bring against you, the more chances you have to grow a young Nephilim into a mature Nephilim, which is when the havoc really starts. Often Terratots, you want a Terratot more than a young if you're trying to run schemes, in most cases. And what taking a grow list does really is force an opponent who brought a crew full of dick kicker models to play more cautiously, because they can charge in and kill some stuff, but when they die there's a good chance the Lilith player is going to be trading up, and that's what I'm talking about with attrition again. It's also been quite funny when my opponents have put particular schemes, such as take prisoner or what have you, on some of my Nephilim, and then they grow into a different model and suddenly my opponent can't score it. That's happened actually a surprising amount. You wouldn't think it. I put that it's countered by summoners, because summoners tend to have lots of models which tend to activate you, and you need you need activation control to position your models to effectively grow or complete schemes within that pool. Summoners often summon minion grade models, which again kind of limits the growing potential you're going for. Swamp Fiend heavy lists work quite well with Lilith because of her trees. Most Swamp Fiend models have some variety of silent or cover bonuses, and blocking line of sight to them can be really annoying for your opponent. Also, being able to swap models out, particularly scheme runners on the flanks for one of your own scheme runners, is pretty good, and it definitely makes range crews have a bit of potentially a bit of trouble. Although they're not really very good when you have to be in a particular place out in the open and having to kill stuff because their damage output tends not to be so great. Waldgeists are durable, but can only last so long against a sustained assault. By the way, the McTavish Doppelganger Waldgeist trio is a very strong combo for holding down a table quarter or even a table half without needing support for the rest of the crew. Finally, the Black Blood Bomb is pretty thematic. I'd argue Claudie can do it better than Lilith, but it's very much in theme with Lilith. And the idea is to have fun by doing lots of damage to your opponent without them being able to defend against it, and put conditions, beneficial conditions on your guys as you're doing it. Black Blood Shaman Doppelganger and Lilith's Summon the Blood upgrade are a must here. Nikema with True Mother can make that pretty gross, and you want to be putting one of your models into 1 inch range of multiple of your enemies for maximum effect. With Lilith, I'm not sure it's that competitive, but then again, the Black Blood Shaman has been errated, so perhaps there are other combos you can now use. Black Blood, Illuminated, and Teddies are sure to be pretty strong, and I've noted down that it's countered by Scalpels. If something can take out your Black Blood Shaman, then you tend to lose a lot of utility, and also there's a lot of anti-pulse abilities out there in Malifaux, particularly in the Gremlins, Outcasts. Probably others. Oh, and it's not so good against armor either. But hey, I only managed to play one game with it with Lilith, and that was immediately shut down by the Victorias. So I'm by no means writing it off, but I suspect it's still not that competitive. Let's think matchups with other masters. To be honest with you, I'd take her into anybody. As I said, her playstyle is super flexible. She doesn't have a lot of keyword synergies, and so really isn't restricted to playing any certain way. And the ability to create cover and block line of sight and scalpel out enemy models and disrupt positioning and movement are just such powerful abilities in any game, and can be dangerous to anyone. But having said that, she has got some weaknesses, I think, and I've kind of put Von Schill and Rammus down because they tend to have a lot of ignore pulses in their crews. And with Lilith, there's generally some Black Blood around there somewhere. And then I've also got Pandora and Marcus because they can really go after her willpower. And willpower 5 on such a high priority target as Lilith is, that is her weak spot in her armour. But I haven't actually played any of these masters, and every master I have played, even when I've lost, I've never felt there was something that was a particularly fundamental counter to Lilith and what she can do, as opposed to, say, taking on blasters with Claudie. So yeah, really, rather than saying she's weak against particular masters, I'd say immunity to pulses, attacks that target willpower, and ignoring line of sight, so things like Ostringer's Sonya when things are burning, and that new Ten Thunders henchman Ogogugu Batari or whatever her name is, Ophelia with her jug rocket. Stuff like that's probably worth looking out for. Okay, so that brings us on to tactics, and I think I've already got a bit ahead of myself and shown you a lot of these in action. But I guess what I want to talk about here is drilling down on how I think about when playing Lilith. And I've given these concepts some pretentious dickhead names because I'm a bit of a pretentious dickhead. Just before I start going through them, I'll mention here that you can build a crew around any one of these tactics and have that as your main game plan. But one of the things that makes Lilith so good is that she can switch gears and change to a different tactic as the game progresses in all but the most rigidly built crews. So let's dive in. The Patient Hunter, Lilith's defensive stance, and I'd argue in general it's her most effective playstyle. It plays to pretty much all the Neverborn's strengths. Ultimately, what you want is some kind of wall between you and the enemy. The forest is best, building or blocking rubble or whatever it is also great. Lilith can extend this or plug in gaps with her trees, the illusionary forests. This protects your crew from range, and makes it difficult for them to engage you whilst you pick off key models with Tangle Shadows or some lures. This allows you to use maximum force against a particular key model, and Neverborn can put out quite a lot of maximum force whilst taking very little in return, and Neverborn aren't very good at taking very much in return. At least in Lilith crews, durability tends to be a weak point. This tends to favour not moving up too much in the early turns, and a more static crew positioning, drawing the enemy to you and staggering their approach so they're only meeting you, getting to your crew one at a time. And then in the later game, once most of your opponent is dead, bursting out into action to run the schemes, because Neverborn are extremely fast in general, and we've got the speed to make up for that slow start. So in this, you're thinking of Lilith as the spider at the centre of the web. You're pulling in the enemy and taking them out. As I said, you can be using your whole crew to do this for taking down particularly big models, or you can just be using Lilith as on her own. Here, for example, I'm just lurking behind this great piece of terrain, and I've pulled out a performer and killed it with Lilith, swapping it for a disruption piece like Lilith. Alternatively, in this game, I'm doing more of a grow crew. Terrain is more sparse, but I've amplified this one with Lilith's illusionary forests, and I've called in an enforcer to come and stand with my Terratot and young Nephilim. The rest of the crew is off doing its other stuff, and to be honest, I think this is one of the more efficient ways to do this is just by having Lilith and one other bodyguard. Particularly if you're doing a grow list, because you can just feed your dudes like this and grow nice mature, all safe and ready to wreak havoc. But sometimes you're going to need to be a bit more aggressive and go out there and get whatever it is you want to go out and get. Maybe the enemy's playing a defensive game and the victory points are falling in their favour. Whatever it is, you've got to reach out and strike them. And that's the thinking behind the Hunter's Spear tactic. Ultimately, what we're aiming to do is apply an excessive amount of pressure to an enemy's weak point. And I've got this note saying use on open centre tables, and that's because if there's not much terrain to hide behind, Lilith's forests are not going to protect the whole crew, and you could get shot off, because as I said, her crews tend not to be too durable, and that kind of forces you to get up into your opponent's face fast. So the way to do this is again rely on Tangle Shadows. Let's go back to this game. So this is quite an open centre board, and my opponent's got quite a shooting heavy crew. I'm protecting my guys as best as I can, but at some point I'm going to have to cross this open zone and get to him, and I better make it quick. So it's time to use the Hunter's Spear, and this is where learning to spot the pressure points can be crucial. So I've identified Rusty Alice as the key model in my opponent's crew. She can summon models by killing mine, and that can lead to quite a big swing in the way the victory points can be scored. She needs to die, but I'm going to have to carve a path to her. Over here we have Lazarus. Now he's a big, durable, dangerous model. He's really the only thing to be concerned about holding down this quarter, and I have a hard counter to him in my mature Nephilim with Retribution's Eye. So I'm going to use the mature to kill Lazarus, and use him as a stepping stone to get to Rusty Alice. So I start by activating all my dudes, getting my opponent to commit as many models as he has before I make my move, which restricts the amount of attacks my spear model is going to take in Retribution. I position a Terratot on the centre line, or as far forward as you can get it safely. Lilith uses the Tangle Shadows to swap the Terratot for the mature. I positioned the Terratot so that when I placed the mature, he could be able to see and get a charge line on Lazarus. I was actually expecting him to be further back and be around here, so I could have popped the mature over here to charge off. Flying is why this is useful, because I can ignore the terrain I'm peeping out behind. And Lilith has plonked down the trees to protect the mature once he goes in. The mature completes the spear throw by hitting home against his target. It doesn't always have to rely on Tangle Shadows, although if you're using it on your own models you only need a 9 of masks, and that's not too bad a deal for such movement utility. You can also use the combo of Doppelganger and Mr. Graves to put any model you like on the centre line ready to go charging in. There's a variety of ways to do this, but if you get the Mimic Perfect Copy trigger on the Doppelganger's Mimic, you can start off Mimic Mr. Graves' Show You the Door, push a particular model, say Nakima, up 6 inches. As part of the zero action, walk back to Mr. Graves, use Show You the Door on him to push him up 6 inches, then activate Mr. Graves to push the further 6 inches with his Show You the Door. And that puts your main beater, say Nakima, up on the centre line, also with Mr. Graves, who's not bad in combat himself. And crucially, that's without your big model having activated. As you can see, there's lots of similarities between the Patient Hunter and the Hunter's Spear techniques. and you can in fact do them at the same time. It's just the way of thinking about it. I think that's the difference, is that, you know, one, you're thinking about pulling in an important model in exchange for one of your less important ones potentially, and with the spear you're concentrating on putting an aggressive model into the opponent's crew and maybe bringing a less dangerous one into yours. Let's talk about the lone wolf. Okay, this is where Lilith is designed to be the scheme runner, and maybe built your crew accordingly, maybe taking some heavier stuff to hold the centre while she's not around. She can run this upgrade light with Beck and Malifaux alone, or you can add in Wings of Darkness, which is probably a very good shout if you've got the stones. So as I showed you earlier, use Tangle Shadows to put Lilith in the backfield, where she can drop a ton of markers, and it's very difficult to get her, as people often don't leave the models capable of taking down a master in their camp in the later turns of the game. Remember, for schemes like Entourage, you can pretty much cross the entire board in one turn, or you can use it to scoot behind enemy lines and start picking off dangerous minions, or just minions hiding in the backfield if a particular scheme calls for that kind of thing. Not that I did that in this particular game, but I wish I had. And finally, there's the Cornered Bear, probably my signature Lilith move, which is essentially you press the oh shit button and get her into combat. Caution to the wind, wing it by the seat of your pants, and try to hit or break the back of the opponent's crew by going on a rampage and buying the rest of your crew, or probably what remains of it, some time to salvage the situation. It doesn't usually work, but you'd be surprised by how much damage she can do if she gets lucky. Watch my report 50-something against the Victorias to see what I mean. And if nothing else, it leaves you with an epic story. But yeah, basically, if you're using this, you've fucked up. I'll end, I think, on this list of models I consider important to have in Lilith's hiring pool. There are obviously many other models in Malifaux that you can pull in for different tasks. You know, the McTavish or the Illuminated are also good shouts here. But if you've got these, at least they'll do a lot of work for you. Looks like I've missed off the Primordial Magic and the Cherub. Whoops. Those are also very important. I didn't talk about the Cherub much. It tends to take more skill to use than Primordial Magic, but it's definitely worth considering. It does some decent damage, it's got some nice pushing abilities, and obviously its main thing is it makes interactions and scheme marker dropping easier, saving you AP. It's definitely worth a shout. Ooh, one thing I forgot to mention, which I wanted to, was that, you know, it's generally a good idea to keep your totem hanging around Lilith. You should be trying to play her so that she's safe and can't be seen, so that's generally a good place for your totem to be as well. Doesn't have to be quite as close as this, but within 6 inches is good, because then when you really need to, you can always use it as Tangle Shadows fodder. In this case there was the Abomination lurking here. I'd marked it for death with the young Nephilim, but I couldn't kill it, so Lilith used her Tangle Shadows to swap out the Primordial Magic for wherever that Abomination was. I think it was maybe around here, and brought it into contact and killed it herself. Having that option there so you can bring something to Lilith rather than shooting her off to it, I've just found is always really helpful to have. So yeah, that's it guys. That's what I've gotten out of 20 games playing with Lilith. I've got to admit that although she's the first master I bought, she's not my favourite, I've got to say. As I hope I've highlighted in this video, she can be super strong, or you know, at least she's got some very good tricks up her sleeve. But her playstyle, or at least the way she feels when you play her, I find isn't very dynamic. There's a lot of subtle movements. If you want a master that's going to be the centerpiece of your crew, you know, the one that explodes into action and does all the damage, wades into combat and sweeps all before it, it's not Lilith. She is the centerpiece and she is what is going to swing you games, but she's never in the spotlight. She's you know, she lurks in the shadows. It's just a positioning here and a mobilization there, you know, a short, sharp death sometimes. It's not big and flashy, it's subtle. I think that's the best way I can describe it. But if that sounds like the kind of thing you want, then go for it, because she is deep and interesting. As I said, I feel I've only barely scratched the surface. So yeah, hope that you liked that. Interesting, enjoyable, what have you. Feel free to leave your experiences in the comments, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.